Hi, my name is Venki Ramachandran, and you're listening to Agribusiness Matters. Agribusiness Matters is an endeavor to discover system thinking in an age of runaway climate change. System thinking in food and agriculture in an age of runaway climate change. I'm really excited to have a very unique and a special guest today, Mithun Madhusudan. Mithun has been a sort of a very a product manager leader in of a certain repute in the Indian product tech circles, and has been doing a lot of interesting writing on on a certain kind of a classification of how the Indian consumer has to be understood. And I've been following his writings quite some time, and been really been fascinated, and I'm so excited to have with you here, Mithun. I really want to start off with a very simple question. I really liked your idea, your email ID, myth.128887. What is the myth behind Mithun?
So, I mean, everybody has some embarrassing stories from the past, right? Or this was like, I don't know, when I was in class 6 or 7, when Gmail was just hitting the market, and Gmail was an invite-only product at that time, right? And then some friends in school got it, and I was like, hey, I also want an invite. This looks like a cool product, etc. I had to create an email ID for myself, and someone I knew had an email address which had the digits from their birthday, right? So 12/8/87 is 12th August 87, which is my birthday, and that's how I sort of came across it, right? Like, and for whatever reason, it has continued to stick, and I use it for all types of communications. Nobody is come back and say, hey, we're not going to talk to you because your email address is childish. At some point, I know I should forward it to something more professional, but maybe not yet, right?
No,
So
I think it really works well because at one level I see a lot of myth elements in what you are talking about in terms of really looking at narratives very closely, and I also see a lot of interesting aspect of how we make sense of certain perceptions about and certain myths about who we think are we are building products for, right?
correct, correct.
So that's where I was very fascinated to understand what exactly is the myth behind Mithun.
So I give you a little bit of background, right? So as you said, thanks for that introduction. I've been building consumer tech products for the non-English speaking Indian audience for like 5 6 years now, right? And I my last stint was at a company called Apna, which was building a professional network for a gray collar audience, professional network plus jobs. Before that, I spent quite a lot of time at a company called ShareChat, which is a regional language social media platform, which, to contextualize it, probably one of the largest social media platforms in the country, and the ones above it are all Western companies, right? So you'd say Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, and then ShareChat, right? But not a lot of people know about it, and I think that's one of the myths, as I said, that I wanted to bust with my writing, right? Like, people do not understand this non-English speaking audience in India, which is the sort of beating heart of our country, very well, especially when it comes to building digital products for them, right? Uh, we are still very much in this bubble of tier one city building for an English speaking audience, somebody who's paying taxes, etc. And that comes out of where the tech ecosystem has come from, right? It's mostly within Bangalore, and even in Bangalore, the startup ecosystem is within a 5 10 kilometer radius in HSR, Koramangala, and Indranagar, right? And when everybody's there, they're talking to the same kind of people, building the same kind of products, then building for somebody who is very, very different from you is a hard problem, right? And that's where a lot of myths come in. Yeah, and the biggest myth is you can't monetize this audience, right? Or this is only a DAU farm, and you can't really sell them
Yeah,
something that they will
much
pay
as
you
myth.
money
Yeah.
for, right? So these are the kind of things that I've thought quite deeply about, and I have some views on them, right? And I'm very careful to say, hey, this is my opinion, because when you're looking at things from such a 10,000 feet level, especially without a lot of data to back it up, you have to go on some level, at some level, on conviction and insight, right? And then see, hey, this is how I believe the world will be 5 years down the line, and people are free to dispute it. But at least it's important that an alternate point of view gets out there, right? So that's the context of whatever writing I've been doing so far.
No, I think it's very interesting in terms of the what myths we build, right? And at one level, I think when I look at your background, right, in terms of your pedigree credentials, at one level you were also, sort of you've come from in India we use the word creamy from a very different context, right? You
Right.
come from a kind of a creamy background, right? And at a certain level, I'm curious for you when you stumbled upon in terms of like building products for for a different audience, which is very different from the kind of circles you and I probably, right, in some sense,
Correct.
habit, you and I socialize and hobnob. What was like the unlearning process for you personally?
Got it. So again, I probably start with a little bit of context, right? So my product management journey was building products for this kind of audience. In fact, the first product role that I had was actually building for a US audience. We were trying to build a replacement for Evernote, right? And US audience is like India 1AA, right? If you have to put that kind of context on it, everybody can pay. It's very English first. The UX is very streamlined, etc. And then I said, hey, I mean, that product didn't work out, so I moved to building a product called Holiday IQ, which was a travel reviews portal. Again, very India 1A specific, English speaking audience who likes to travel, etc. And then I realized, hey, I want to do product, but I also want to make sure I want to do consumer product because that's what interesting to me. But then I wanted to take a punt, right? Like founders take a bet on a market saying, hey, this is a market that is going to be large, so I have to be building something in this market. So I took a bet on the consumer part of it, right? Which is that my head, it was always that India is a very large country, very diverse, and this English speaking is only 5-10% of the audience, right? So if you're going to build large legacy generational businesses, at some point you have to become a very horizontal player across this audience who does not speak English, right? uh, and this is the audience in a digital product space that is coming online slowly. This was 2017-18 when Geo was just sort of taking form. And I was like, hey, that's what I want to place my bets on. There is going to be a large set of learnings that can be done by building for this audience. In my head, I thought of it almost like the FMCG sachetization boom, right? Like in the late 80s, saying this is how FMCG actually expanded through a bunch of innovations outside the large 1 kg and 500-gram things and became a really mass phenomenon. And I was betting on that kind of uptake, right? So that's my thought process on joining ShareChat at that time. This was 2018. And at that time, ShareChat was a fairly small product, 5 million daily active users, a decent amount of funding raised, but still a lot of questions on whether things will work out in this market or not, which are to a certain extent still being asked and should be asked. For me, the unlearning process was a lot about understanding the motivations of this audience, right? And what when they're coming in contact with a digital product for the first time, how do they react, right? So uh, 2018, I think people will not really remember how different it was from a smartphone perspective, right? Everybody is just coming on to Geo. uh, the new internet audience probably had access only to WhatsApp as a means of using their smartphone to to the fullest capacity, right? Today, obviously, everybody has gone deep on YouTube, and a lot of e-commerce apps have done their regional language plays, etc. By 2018, it was fairly, yeah, this is what it is. Anybody who can figure out how to use it can use the product. And WhatsApp was the predominant sort of touch point for users on from this audience, right? And the kind of demand that they had for content in their regional language was something that I was really sort of astounded to see, right? And I had to spend a lot of time to sort of work backwards and figure out what really is driving this, right? And the conclusion I came to was that this language that we almost take for granted is such a deep rooted cultural connection for this audience that anything around that is something that automatically binds people together and builds a sort of rapport, right? So for ShareChat in the early days was, this is the only place where I can get short entertainment content in my language, right? And it was such a big deal for this audience because it was almost like nobody cared about them, and this audience was not this content was not available, and ShareChat is the only product that sort of ties it together and brings it out for them, right? And then again, over some, it is not just language and like simple entertainment, right? That language denotes a certain kind of culture and a certain kind of demographics, it's a certain kind of geography within this large country, right? And this content is a way for people to express themselves with that background, right? And users are just not comfortable expressing themselves in a language and context that they're not familiar with, right? Now, like, give you an example of somebody in, let's say, Tamil Nadu logging on to ShareChat for the first time, right? The first experience will be like, hey, all of this is great content in my language, right? So first aha moment. The second aha moment will be actually the aesthetics of the product itself, right? So now, again, if you're familiar or you keep your eyes open when you're traveling through Chennai or Tamil Nadu, you'll figure out that the way they talk about things or express themselves is very, very different from, for example, from Kerala, right? For a big a good example is, everybody refers to Rajnikant as super mega star, right? And maybe a couple of more mega and supers before that, right? This
No,
kind of,
nobody refers him as super mega star. I'm from Chennai. They call him as a superstar. Yeah, but yeah.
I mean, the word super and mega are very prevalent.
I
Is
mean,
at
they
least my
add this for different stars.
correct.
But at least
The
I mean, you're talking to a Rajini fanatic here. So at
so
least
I mean, yeah,
to a
let me
Rajini
change it
fan,
to,
it is largely only superstar. So
yeah,
anyways,
so
yeah,
superstar
we'll keep the
Rajnikant, right?
politically aside topics there.
Correct. But those words are actually part of the aesthetics and the
Correct.
cultural
Yeah, yeah.
sort of
I
milieu
get
of
what you're
that
saying. I
language,
get what you're saying. I was just
right?
trying to
And
clear
now
that. Yeah.
suddenly you see all of that content and that aesthetics on the product, and you have another level of connection with it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all of these things were now had to be for me unlearned, right? Because I was an English speaking guy, born and brought up on French. Sure, I was from Kerala and had a little bit of connection to the language, etc. But then I realized each of these languages, the communities, they're all so very different, which means that all the kind of content, the kind of conversation, the kind of interactions they will have, the kind of digital space that they want is going to be very, very different for each of these, right? And that was I think, a big sort of sets of learning for me. And what ShareChat did well was obviously starting with languages from day one, right? Where they realized that, boss, there's no point just trying to build a single product when every single part or state of our country is so different in the way they will consume and interact with content, right? So yeah, I hope that answers some parts of the question.
No, I want to delve deeper on this, right? See, for
Yeah.
me, you briefly touched upon the sachetization, right?
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, I'll be very honest, right? I mean, the whole idea of fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, at one point I was like, in awe of that idea when back in the early days when I was a student of management and there. But over time, I've come to resent it because in a certain way it has in a way grossly overly simplified by sort of saying that the moment you say it's as a pyramid,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
automatically see that it's going to be dripping down, right?
Correct. Correct.
I feel while the sachet revolution may have sort of made some of the guys in HUL and Unilever and all of those happy probably, but it was still a very bad idea when you look at the way the market almost it was almost like I'm going to give you a second degree, a third degree of cheaper version of the product that
Hmm.
didn't respect the consumers as to what they really wanted. Although it had a phenomenal success, but somewhere I feel very uncomfortable, in the way it was presented and the way it came down to. So because it creates certain kind of narratives there. So tell me, how do you see that, right? Do you see, because we typically we have this idea that whatever is done, whatever is done in an India one kind of a context, right? The stripped down version is what is what we start to tend to look at it, right? And so tell me, what are all the in your from your understanding, what are the perils of this kind of understanding?
Okay, so I think the let's go through a couple of points. Right? Is the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid? I think I don't. The only fundamental problem I have with that phrase is that it's called fortune and it's called bottom of the pyramid, right? If you go a little bit deeper, and maybe that's not the exact idea, from a consumer need satisfaction perspective, what the FMCG companies did was exactly what the consumer wanted, right? And we can debate about the sort of messaging of bottom of pyramid and blah blah, etc., etc. The point still remains that that product got consumers to part with their money, right? For maybe not a want, right? Like between a need and a want, these were things that users wanted and people paid money for it. So it's a little bit, I mean, I would say superficial to debate kya, hey, matlab, should they have done it, etc., etc., right?
Then I get what you're saying.
As
Yeah,
a
yeah.
as a business, you have to deliver the kind of value that the customer demands, right? Now there's a section of the audience that demands that value at that price point, right? And I say, okay, fine. I mean, I'll sell liquid machine detergent at the very, very high end, but at the very, very low end, I'll sell only powder, which is maybe not as efficient. Point remains that people still want to buy it at that price point, right? And from a business perspective, I can only deliver that much value at that price point. I can't deliver like a super clean experience at 1 rupee, 2 rupee sachets, right? And that's the way I think about it. Right? It's a very transactional relationship, right? Like you shouldn't read anything beyond that, right? Now, the important idea that comes through from this is that the India is a very sort of broken up market from top to bottom, right? Where it is a pyramid in some sense, if you have to visualize it. And maybe bottom is not the right wording aesthetically, etc., etc. But if you cut it by income, this is, I mean, there's a very large sort of flat area towards the middle, right?
There's no way to two ways about it. There is inequality. So yeah.
Right. I mean, it is inequality, right? And it will take time for those mechanics to improve, right? Like over next 10, 20 years, there hopefully growth happens the right way from bottom up, etc., etc., and then that sort of compresses. But today it is what it is, right? So now the challenge facing people who are trying to build products for this audience is which part of this audience do I want to target? How much can I extract from this audience? And what is the best price value combination that I can offer, right? In that context, the small value, small price mechanic is probably what is most useful for this audience, right? Which is, you probably don't want to sell them 50,000 rupee courses, right? But maybe something much shorter for 1,000 rupees is what they're looking for, right? Now, there is no denying that because that thing is 50,000, there will probably be a little bit more quality, probably a little bit more depth, right? But the thing at 1,500, 2,000 rupees will be slightly lower quality, lower depth. But that is unfortunately the way the capitalist market works, right? And now, again, the challenge for people and what people don't realize, again, because we all come from this India one market where like 50,000 is not even an amount, right? If you're selling an education course, everybody like, huh, you should charge at least that much, right? But if you go a little bit lower, then you start to realize, yeah, that is not within the paying capacity of this audience, right? Where a lot of people give up is, hey, I don't have a product that I can sell below this. But the innovation will lie in what is the product that I can sell at this price point, right? Because the price point is fixed. That is everybody as a consumer knows. But what is the exact product that I can chop up within what value? How do I communicate? That's where probably the real magic will happen, right? And I don't think a lot of companies have figured it out, right? There are very, very few examples in the digital tech space, right? If you go to proper business, danda, etc., then to like people have made money, right? But tech, because we're all in this HSR Indiranagar circle, we really haven't figured it out.
Yeah, no, see, I mean, one reason why I really like Sajid Pai's India 1, India 2, India 3 framework, I'm sure which he had attributed to some other professor or something, I remember from what he had written.
Right.
But to a large extent, I think this framework, it kind of suits me better rather than the bottom of the pyramid because
Yeah.
we are not assuming that somebody has to move from 3 to 1 or 1 to 2 or
Correct.
2 to 3. right?
Correct.
They,
I
they
very
just
simply say not calling it bottom, right?
exactly. So
Right.
in a way that is the very much there, right? In a way that is slightly better off from there. But this, I mean, when I was reading your recent post on local, and I
Hmm.
observed this interesting aspect, right? Like for instance, in I don't know if I'll maybe digress to a little bit of a, because you are also right
Sure,
in your
sure.
writings, there are a lot of digression. Let me also digress to a different.
Sure, sure. Yes.
If you see in Alai by the movie, there was a scene where Shalini goes off and goes to a nearby store and
Hmm.
says, I need to, there's a local retail store, right?
Right.
And she says that I make a call, and then she makes a call. It's a very it was in a certain sense a reality of how India was in 90s, right?
Hmm.
And to a large extent, what is very fascinating when I read about yours is there's a certain sense of time evolution theory, right? In
Hmm.
terms of at one level, what the India one market was, right? At one level, we still had local accounts with our local grocers,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And we
Hmm.
had accounts with our local grocers, and we sort of settled accounts between them. We never directly got to pay and at every single transaction.
Hmm.
And to a large extent, we see now when I was reading about it, I was intrigued by this parallel, right? In terms of at one level, what was then the reality in India one
Hmm.
is now a certain sense of reality from India two and India to a section India three market also, right?
Correct. Correct.
And which makes me very intriguing in terms of saying there is almost like a time theory, right? In terms of what was once there, it has sort of moved into an India 2 kind of context, or probably it was already there, but it's just that the India 1 shifted rapidly.
Correct. Correct. So I think that is a constant across the consumer, right? Like if you talk to any marketer today, he'll say the horizontal thing that is happening is affluence is increasing in India, right? Which
Mm,
is affluence is accelerating much faster than India 1, but it is definitely also happening in India 2 and India 3, right? Like
mm,
people are sort of suddenly now they've seen uh, how what a good life looks like, largely to this content explosion. Right now everybody has content available to them on their phone, and they're able to see what is happening outside, and sort of compare their life, etc. And now there is a very strong sense of aspiration, right? So today, like, we've sort of gone past very very quickly. Like, I've never held a credit account with my local kirana store, right? My parents definitely did, right? But now if I talk to somebody who is maybe 30-year-old but in Meerut, he also probably does not hold a credit account in his kirana store, but he likely has a BNPL account with Simple or something like that, right? So the way consumers evolve is actually speeding up quite a bit, right? Affluence is the large horizontal that I can sort of think of, and if you take affluence improving, then you can do a bunch of sort of vertical hypothesis from that, right? That, let's say, India 1 affluence increasing means they're going from horizontal e-commerce marketplaces to very boutique vertical marketplaces, right? So, and hence the
well,
entire D2C wave,
yeah.
right? And hence the entire D2C wave. If you go a little bit deeper, let's say somebody who is earning 20, 30K per month lives in Meerut, for example. Earlier, he used to go sort of to roadside shops to buy clothes, etc. Right? But now there is a mall in Meerut, and he's saying, "Yeah, I want to go to mall and buy 500 rupees ka shirt," right? And that is now a jump up in affluence, right? So that kind of thing is happening, and I would hazard to say it is probably accelerating very very fast, right? Like in if that kirana credit to no credit took 20 years, probably the next cycle is like 5 years, right? I'm not even saying 10 years, right? I think the next 5 years will be very very different. And now on top of that, there are platform shifts happening, things are moving much faster in the tech world, etc., etc. So I think the consumer 5 years down the line will be very, very different. Uh, some of the mechanics that hold today and I've held 20 years earlier will still hold, but not all, right? And that's why you have to sort of look forward. I was a discussion on the comment thread where this keeps coming back at me, right? Because as I said, I go top down and insight heavy, and then that person was telling me on comments, yeah, there are no profit pools in India too, right? Like all of this is like fine. Matlab, there's so many companies, 5, 10 years, $2 billion, $3 billion spent, nothing has happened. I like sure, right? Like it hasn't happened, but can you say it will not happen, right? Like looking backward and drawing analogies from that is not really a builder mindset, right? That is a public market mindset, right? Yeah, hey, you have to look at equities, how they've gone up, etc., some inside information, etc. But I am talking completely top down, insight first, right? I'm sure a lot of companies have not worked, but can you deny that 5 years later GDP per capita is going to be significantly higher? Can you also deny that someplace in merit is going to be significantly better off than it is today, right? And if not, then there are a lot of opportunities out there, right? Then you can't keep coming back and say no profit pools, because if you're saying that today, you're already probably behind on building for them.
No, but let's unpack this a little more deeper, right?
Hmm.
Uh, you talked about, you made an interesting point. You said there are certain things that are changing and there are certain things that probably may not change, right?
Hmm.
Recently, I came across this, this kind of it has become a kind of a meme kind of thing. But I really like the way Bhavin Turakia, the founder of Flock and other
Hmm.
products, right? He made
Director,
an
yeah.
interesting post that almost any consumer tech product largely has a certain pain points to solve, right?
Hmm.
Either it has to save time, or it has to save money, or it has to make money, or it has to improve your status, or it has to entertain you, or it has to improve your relationship. Is that like broadly any consumer tech product solves these set of bunch of pain points?
Sure.
So I'm just is there a very distinctive sort of approach in what are the problems that India to consumer largely, right? Since you focus on the consumer tech side, India to
Hmm.
consumer is wanting to solve that's very different from India one, the kind of things that we've listed so far.
Hmm. So, see, I am in no ways an expert, right? So, a lot of things that I talk about are drawn from my limited verticalized experience in the 2 or 3 companies
Sure,
and
sure. From your
talking to
experience,
people.
is there anything you're seeing as a
Yeah.
divergent trend here?
So, I'll just connect back to affluence, right? And
Sure.
as affluence, aspiration, status, all of this is sort of connected together, right? Uh, the way I look at it is uh, even the aspiration and the affluence of this India to consumer is eventually bounded by how much money he can spend to gain that aspiration or to get that aspiration, and eventually aspiration sort of boils down to status, right? Like you aspire to buy a car because everybody in your society will say isni nayi car kharidi hai, right? Eventually that's the whole thing. Now, if you go to an India to consumer, aspiration is significantly increasing, right? They're all like reels and share chat customers, and they've seen on YouTube how people are making money. There are tens of thousands of business ideas. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, but unfortunately, they're still constrained by their income ranges, right? Now, if you connect that to sort of how you can make money off this kind of aspiration, is a very interesting way to look at this kind of audience, right? And I'll take one example what I've seen in offline, and one example of what we did in share chat is the online way, right?
Sure.
The way this audience thinks about status is very, very different from how you and I would think about status. The key difference being the level of subtlety, right? Like, even though you want to show status, you will not be very outspoken about it, right? Like, you will not throw a party and invite everybody in your apartment saying, I bought a new car, right? What you'll do is you'll do a small puja, make sure it's in the morning where all the uncle and aunties are walking around so everybody knows, right? And but on the other hand, right, if somebody in India too, let's say, bought a bullet, right, there is definitely going to be a party happening. It will probably be on a flex somewhere in their village chora saying, this bhaiya has bought a bullet, aaj sham ko cake cutting hogi, right? Everybody's invited, right? So that's a very interesting, at least in my way, to look at
Yeah.
the way they think about status, right? Now, how smart people have started sort of building on this, right? If you in my hometown of Payanur in North Kerala, there are a bunch of these fried chicken outlets that have opened up, right? And they call themselves X Fried Chicken, where X is anything, right? His name, his uncle's name, whatever, whatever. It is basically the same kind of KFC kind of chicken, which all this audience knows is something fancy, because everybody's heard of KFC, because that's the kind of branding that they've done, right? If they watch any TV, they've all seen KFC, and it's a white guy sitting in some fancy restaurant eating chicken with cheese and all of that, right? Now these guys figure out, yeah, the guys who are watching this advertisement in Payyanur can never go and afford a KFC. In fact, KFC is not going to open a store here because they know this is the average money I can make from this. So what I'll do is I'll open a fried chicken store, right? Make sure it is priced at the level which I know people will buy. Put some nice tables, make the store look fancy, and put an AC, right? Now that is the way my aspiration is being satisfied within the constraints as a consumer of how much I can spend, right? So now I've gone and taken my family, instead of a roadside Golgappa store, to an air conditioned fried chicken place where I'm eating something fancy like white people do, to put it very simply, right? And now that is how this guy is making money, right? So that's the offline world, and you can extend it to sort of food and retail is where I've seen this most happening,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
stores are becoming more fancy, instead of kirana, it's becoming modern retail, new kinds of food, new kinds of experiences outside, etc. Right? The other way I was talking about is online, right? So we built a product called audio chat rooms, where at the very core of it, we are allowing users to show status, to build status and to show status, and we are monetizing that, right? So this the product, if you've used Twitter Spaces, you know broadly what it is, right? Like some people are talking in audio and you want to sort of hear, and sometimes you want to join the conversation, right? Now for this audience, our audience was fairly young, right? And not interested in intellectual conversation on share chat, right? So we sort of positioned it as a party, right? Like you come here and you're going to join a party, right? Which means you join this audio chat room, instead of somebody talking about boring politics stuff, there's some music happening, people are shouting at each other, there's jokes being cracked, etc., etc. Now imagine an offline scenario, you're just entering a party and there's a large group having a lot of fun, right? Now as an outsider, you want to go and join that group, right? But and this is very like looking backward, all of this makes sense. This is all core consumer behavior, right? If you want to be part of that group, you have to bring something to that group, or very fundamentally, you have to be cool enough to join that group, right? Like think back to your college days and parties which you attended, right? You won't be invited if you're not cool, right? But now in a digital space, how do you sort of with people you don't really know, how do you show you're cool, right? You show you're cool by buying gifts and giving it to the group, right? Very overt manifestation of being cool, right? Where I will buy something worth 100 rupees, 200 rupees, 300 rupees, and I'll gift it to the group. And they'll say, hey, this is a new guy. He spent 200, 300 rupees. Who is this? Let's bring him on board and add him to the conversation, right? And that's basically the mechanic, right? You are paying to get to be part of a high status group, be part of that party. Now, as a member of that cool group, you automatically have more status, right? So now you need to keep maintaining that status. There are other people who are saying, hey, this is how I sort of buy status. And we build a bunch of more mechanics on how you can increase your status, right? And this is
Very,
how you monetize.
very interesting. Let me unpack this a little more deeper, right? Because what you're
Yeah,
saying is very, very interesting. Like, see, typically what happens is we all, whenever we have to go to, like, my son's birthday parties happen in my apartment, right? I mean,
right.
my son goes to a bunch of birthday parties, and mentally we all make a calculation, right? What
Hmm.
is the level of gift I need to give?
Correct.
Right? In
Correct.
terms of, do I need to buy a 2000 worth gift, or do I need to buy a 1000 worth gift, or do I
Correct.
simply put a cash envelope of certain X amount? Right?
Correct.
In this kind of case, how does their mind think, and what have you looked at it from a product mechanics perspective?
So for you again, I mean,
No,
you're
not for me.
thinking,
Overall, from this consumer who is saying, who's
fair.
trying to come into this
So
party. Yeah.
yeah, it's India one versus India two, right? So you're being very subtle about this in your son's birthday party, right? You can't ask directly because you don't know how people will think, and you have to sort of look at what people got your son, etc., etc. Or that subtlety is not there for this audience, right? That you assume ki is not a problem. So now it is very overt, ki boss, like you want to join this party, you have to give a gift. And we built leaderboard saying these are the people who gifted the most, and this is how they've got into that chat room. right? So now everybody knows as they enter a chat room that, hey, this is the top person because he spent the most money and he's gotten the gift. And obviously he sounds cool and like looks like those guys are having fun. So I need to do this much, right? Sometimes there are more interesting mechanics that we built in, saying like, okay, you don't want to pay money, maybe you have some talent, right? So why don't you play a game of tic-tac-toe with my friend here who's in the chat room? If you win, will bring you up, right? And then like that kind.
Equivalent of what we do in the, you want to move your biceps and you have this
Correct.
fight.
Correct, right? So
Got
it's
it.
another way of like showing status basically, right? But the
Very
money part
interesting.
is very overt, very obvious, right? There, nobody wants to hide it, right? Because for them, they know, yeah, like the fastest way for me to gain status is have a lot of money, right? There might be other ways, but
Hmm.
those are slower, right? Like,
Hmm.
okay, I can get a government job, and that is status, but that's going to take me 3 years to study and maybe 2 years of training or whatnot. If I
Hmm.
have a lot of money today, I can throw it around and like make sure everybody is my friend, right? So
Hmm.
we like super double down on that, right? There's no hiding any of this in the product. And if you're not hiding it, makes it slightly easier to build because then all of these mechanics become obvious to everybody in that loop.
Correct. And it can also be easily be gamed in also, no? I mean, yeah, that's also another aspect of, I don't know to what extent people game the system.
In saying gaming, in what sense?
In the sense, typically, I want to give the best gift and then, I hijack it for my purpose or there.
No, I mean, so those fundamentals we sorted out. Here, there's a chat room owner, and if this guy
Hmm.
starts misbehaving or whatever, he's banned forever, right? And there's also, because now you have to assume it is that it's a party mindset, right? And nobody wants to be kicked out of a group for
Hmm.
being the bad person, right? And by and
Hmm.
large, like of course there will be rowdy groups, but by and large they're lesser, right?
Yeah, I
And you
understand.
say
Hmm.
everybody wants to join a fun party, nobody wants to go
Yeah,
around breaking
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. No, but I'm also very equally intrigued by your comment about India one being subtle
Hmm.
vis-a-vis India two being non-subtle,
Hmm.
right? I'm very curious to understand the psychological mechanics there, right? Because at one level, at one level, it sounds very obvious at one level, right? Because you
Hmm.
see, like, I mean, I'm reminded of the famous movie, the Zingat song, right? I
Hmm.
think
Hmm.
in the Marathi movie,
Hmm. Hmm.
where you see the kind of party and celebration that happens, right? And even you've
Yeah.
seen, and I've seen this in many of my rural travels, that like if there is a family get together, there is a big flex, and you show that we are getting married or whatever, right? And I've seen this in so many rural travels. But is that, I'm curious, why is it that there is a need to announce, let's say my family social gathering? Why is there a need to blow it up and put it in a flex? I'm curious, have you looked at the mechanics deeper?
Yeah, I've thought about it, but I haven't gotten to a really good answer, right? Like the why people who say we are subtle are actually still trying to sort of be very overt about status, right? Like printing flexes, like big pandals and all of that. I've not really been able to figure that one out. Right? The only one thing I can think of is because, as I said, right, like in this India 2 kind of audience, there are a lot of personal connections, right? Like that multiplayer mode, right? That everybody knows everybody because they've lived and born and brought up in that same space. A lot of it is extended family, etc. So as- everybody knows कि यार इसके पास इतना ही पैसा है, right? Or this is the kind of status he has, etc., etc., right? Now, if you want to be sort of a bigger person there, like what are the kind of things you do, right? One kind of persona you will see in this audience is the politically connected guy, right? Which is the person everybody calls who, if they want to solve a government problem, right? There is some problem and that person has status because of that, right? And he will be very overt about it. Hey, I can help you, right? And this is how things work, right? Maybe it is just because this is what they're used to, right? Like I am used to, and it doesn't work, right? When I go to a government office, I don't want to use a tout, right? Or I don't want to call my uncle and say, "Okay, I'm going here. Can you give me help?" Because it just like it seems weird to me. It seems off, right? On the other hand, this audience is like, "Boss, you're stupid." Right? This is how things are done in India and have been done for the last 50 years, right? So if you're suddenly trying to hope that something else is going to change for you, then maybe, I mean, you haven't got the right idea, right? So this is how things work basically, right? That's the simplistic idea I've gotten. It worth examining a little bit more, but maybe largely from then an anthropomorphic kind of lens, and much more sort of psychology, right? That I'm sort of used to.
In a certain sense, if I were to sort of speculate on it, right, there
Hmm.
is a largely we urbans have, urban Indians or India one audience have become fairly atomized.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Atomized in their relationships, atomized in terms of who they are in according to. So automatically everything becomes a matter of factor of one.
Hmm. Hmm.
Whereas to your point about India too, which largely, largely plays in a multiplayer game mode, the
Hmm.
automatically the sociality of how much you relate is at a slightly larger scale, right?
And the
I mean,
status becomes,
family, the best place to observe this is in your weddings, right?
yeah, correct.
In our weddings, the parents take charge, and then, at least in my case, it happened. I didn't
Hmm.
rebel and say I will do it in a, there are a lot of people who do that, right? Who
Hmm.
say I will have a very, very toned down, stripped down wedding.
Simple way. Yeah.
I will let my parents celebrate the way they want to, and for them, it is a question of the celebrating in their social contexts.
Correct. Correct.
And I think that's probably where that kind of element of celebrating at the level of their sociality, in terms of, because they are connected with the entire village, right?
Correct.
So
Correct. So I
probably that.
think that makes sense, right? Because if you boil it down, then in multiplayer, status becomes much more important, right?
Yeah,
Because in single player, then you like, who do you want to show status to, right? There's nobody, right? Like probably 10, 15 people who you're very close to in your life. They
yeah.
already know, yeah, you've been with them. They already know how much money you have, and there's no point in being overt about it, right?
Correct.
And which
And we
is
are anyway networked also, no? We are equally the privileged few who are in the India one are
hmm,
already in network atmosphere,
correct,
right? Where
correct,
you and I can make connections with anyone in terms of the kind of privileges we are. We are a
correct.
privileged kind of a set of people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely,
From
definitely.
that sense, I think that's also a way of showing them that where they are standing in there. Because for us, we want to be now individualists because we for us it's the shadow that we carry in of the privilege.
Correct, correct. And then, I mean, then you can connect it back to all of this. There's a trend of not buying real estate, not buying cars, all of that kind of stuff, right? Because like, some of this just doesn't make economic sense, right? And everybody knows they do it for status. And then if you sort of like retreated or become atomized to that extent, then like, yeah, why do you need a car, right? I don't want to show it to anybody, right? I know, and maybe another way to think about this is, if you look at that Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like some of us have already reached the top levels, right? Which is kya, like kisko dikhana hai, right? We are happy with ourselves and of ourselves, so there's no need to show any of this for outside, right? Whereas maybe people are still, and it has to be worked through, right? I'm not saying I suddenly got here. I did have a time in my life where I valued status and I wanted it, right? But now that is gone, right? And there's a different element, right? So yeah, maybe that's another reason.
Yeah, and but also, I want to also maybe look at one aspect here, right? There is a whole question of course, it's a political topic, but I'll still bring it from a product lens here. In terms of vis-a-vis building for Bharat, vis-a-vis building for India one and India two, right? I
Hmm.
think in one of your presentations, you kind of start off from building Bharat and then you switch it to India two.
Yeah,
In a certain sense, this question also comes up largely because in India also there is a whole lot of conflation between rural and agriculture,
right, right,
right? And this is point I have oftentimes talked about a lot in my work also, right? That typically in my understanding, of course, farmers and people who live in India 2 and India 3 also, to a certain extent, their lives are intertwined with rural and agricultural,
right,
right?
right.
Do you see any of these distinctions playing a really, really important roles in understanding their behaviors? in terms of whether it's a India or a Bharat or a rural or agricultural. Because I had this conversation also with I think with Sajid, where we were having this conversation about India 3 has almost seems like I don't want to touch it from a startup's perspective,
Right.
right? And then he said, it's not necessarily India 3 equivalent to rural.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I have the sort of negative set, which is that India 2 and India 3 does not mean agriculture, right? It is much, much broader than that in terms of how they earn their money and where the money and income comes from and what their day jobs are like, right? But now if you have to cut again saying only agriculture, then it's probably from India 1 all the way down, right? If you say, okay, there will be farmers, let's say we go to Andhra and Telangana and you look at the top farmers, etc., they're earning a lot of money, right? And they have a certain
More than
lifestyle.
you and I do.
Yeah, exactly, right? And they have a certain lifestyle, and the kind of goods that they buy will be very, like similar to what we buy. The only difference will be, okay, mother tongue and thinking is probably Telugu versus English, right? Where like I've come from Malayalam to English, that person is stuck with Telugu, right? But it is important to sort of make this distinction from, I think, largely one axis in my head, right? It is the depth of the market, right? That's the simplistic way to think about this, because everything else is a little bit more broken out, right? When I say India 1, it is super homogeneous in my head, right? Like it is exactly people like you and me, right? If you go and say, hey, have you seen this Friends episode, that guy will have seen it, right? And okay, you work in a multinational, he'll say yes. Okay, you earn 30 lakhs, he'll say yes. Have you ever bought from a D2C website? He'll say yes, right? And all of these kind of things then become a very, very sorted sort of customer persona, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you have an idea for this guy and he's almost like you, now you don't need to talk to 100 customers, right? Maybe you need to only talk to 10 and you're the 11th guy. And then they're able to internalize a bunch of things, right? Okay, this is how I build product. This is where distribution is. This is where this guy hangs out. This is a marketing message, digital channels, blah, blah, etc., right? Versus in my head, if you go beyond that to India 2, then everything sort of breaks down, right? And suddenly this guy is not even speaking English. Everything might be the same, right? He might be sitting in an AC room, working from home, working on a MacBook and using Zoom, but he does not speak English. And that actually is a big enough sort of distinction, because your marketing message, the way your product speaks to him, all of that has to change, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I make the largest distinction, right? Otherwise, I mean, yeah, and I think I've made this point also in my head. This is the big chunk, and the biggest differentiation between India 1 and India 2 is probably language, right? Not even income that much, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I think about it. Agriculture, in fact, in my head doesn't even come into the picture, right? India 1 may be agriculture hai, India 2 may be agriculture hai. Maybe percentages differ a little bit, kind of persona differs a little bit. But then if you're building, let's say you're building a product for agriculture, you have to be very sure, are you building for the top farmers, or you're building for the middle farmers, or you're building for the tenant farmers, right? Because then everything will change for you, right? Because the top farmers, you have to think like yourself. Wants to be a businessman, wants operational control, dashboards, visibility, etc., etc. Whereas a middle guy is like, yeah, boss, don't tell me all of this like complicated tech stuff, right? I need to know next month how much I can make, how I will pay my debts off, etc., etc. Right? So very different kind of
Yeah,
thinking
but
when you're building.
there is a kahani mein twist, like the India 1 guy, oftentimes his dashboard needs are very, very primitive and doesn't want actually digital dashboards because,
Possible.
and I've had so many conversations around this aspect, right? Because the India 1 farmer largely has an informal labor relationship and informal land tenure relationship with the land he's holding.
Okay.
And because of that, there's no way where he would want to formalize it and put it in a system.
Okay, got it. Understood.
So and so there is always an implicit need that these relationships, the land tenure relationship, the land holding relationships are largely informal.
So nothing
That has
can
been
be in a system. You mean?
Sorry.
You They don't want it in a system or written down
Correct.
or something like that.
Correct. They want a system because for them they have a mutual arrangement and agreement. Like this is what we are doing. We will share our produce from say 50% or whatever. Now that is will never be legible in the system.
Fair, fair. As probably you can extend this to any SMB business also, right? And I'll say this is why you'll hit a ceiling,
Or
because
is
if
it?
you're
I
build,
don't know.
yeah, I was
Can you
talking to
extend
somebody.
this?
Yeah, I was talking to somebody who's building something similar to a salary tool for SMB businesses, right? Factory owners, and like beyond a certain point, he doesn't want digitization, because the moment it gets systemic, then some IT guy from some office will, sorry, income tax, not technology, income tax guy from GST office will come and he'll say, "Show me your computer," and be able to figure all of this out, right? I don't want that, right? I don't want this headache. For the last 50 years, the way I made money is by sort of cutting out the government, right? So then this digitization doesn't make sense to me. Of course, this is all today, by the way, right? Like you can say, you can take a call on whether this will go away in 10 years, 20 years, or 5 years, right? But this is how it is today. And if you're building a business, you don't build businesses based on what the consumer behavior is today, right? You say, okay, this is today, but this is what will happen in 10 years, and hence this is the path I will follow.
Yeah, so let's maybe delve into the in a slightly more nuanced way, right? Like you said, what you said was very interesting in terms of for India too. The primary distinction is the language, right? I'll also share a small anecdote, right? Recently, I was on a trip to Eastern UP, where I met a lot of farmers, and this I'm talking about the slightly poorer regions of the Uttar Pradesh, and we are talking about regions in Bharej and Shravasti. Now, I was in a group of meeting of I was in a meeting with a lot of small local nanopreneurs who are all working closely with farmers. They start talking, and the first thing they say is, I'm sorry, we are not so comfortable with Hindi. They started saying this in Hindi. I'm just translating it what they said that. But and I was amazed by that comment, because here they are in the heartlands of UP and then saying we are not comfortable with Hindi.
Okay, what is the language then?
So they have their own dialects
Dialect.
there.
Correct.
So
Yeah, fair.
they switched to the dialect, and then somebody else was translating in Hindi for the others.
Correct. So
So
I think
yeah,
the point is that when I see, there's a level of distinction, right? Like that in ShareChat, I'll reverse, sorry, sort of give you another anecdote, right? In ShareChat, the question for us always was, yeah, we know Hindi is like 40% of our audience, but actually it's not Hindi, right? Because if you go from west to east, like probably every 200 kilometers, the way they speak Hindi changes.
yeah, which is
Right?
exactly what I want to understand in the sense of how do you then make product decisions from that kind of a context when
Yeah,
the
I
Hindi
think the
is diverse.
super tough, right? Which is why I'm saying that the fact that everybody's building for India one is actually because it is orders of magnitude easier than building for this kind of audience, right? Because English, basically, right? Now you go anywhere outside, you go 200 kilometers outside Delhi, suddenly the way they speak Hindi will change, right? And I will be uncomfortable there. And I've been born and brought up in Delhi with this kind of Hindi, right? So the smart thing to do would be to find the lowest common denominator, right? Which in this case is actually Hindi, because beyond that it becomes very unsustainable to manage a horizontal product, right? What you can also do, for example, there's a company called stage.in, which does content, right? They've said we will go super deep in all of these dialects, right? So they do Haryanvi and dialect specific content for only that kind of audience. And they said, okay, this is the total addressable market, and this is the kind of money we can make from this audience, and we are okay with it, right? So that's the other decision you can take. Either you say, if you want to be horizontal, pick the lowest common denominator and be sure that, okay, you will only be able to do justice to a certain part of the audience, or you say we're going super vertical, it will be a smaller market, but we are okay with the size of that market, right? As actually the only two ways to think about it, right? And by and large, everybody's gone top down, because when you're in this venture ecosystem and you're building startups and you raise venture money, you have to show billion-dollar outcomes, right? And when you say billion-dollar outcomes, everybody wants a deep, large, homogeneous market, right? This is what VCs will tell you day in and day out. And the moment you go into this dialect business and all, they won't understand it, right? They'll be like, oh shit, okay, I don't think you can build this product.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I think what you're saying in terms of going deeper and then, but of course, the lower common denominator. But I was just curious to get a sense of, are there like, because see, your language influences the way you think.
Correct, correct.
And largely, I've had this conversation with, I think, with Krishify
Hmm,
CEO. I think I'm forgetting his name,
hmm,
Rajesh.
hmm.
Where when he was designing a social learning engagement module in Krishify, there was a sense of building a learning module in a way where you are not just teaching obviously to them, but the person is teaching it for an ex audience.
Interesting.
It's like one for n kind of a social learning module.
Interesting.
And because that's a kind of audience who comes in and learns, and so he had to incorporate that in that principle in that. And he said this, he was, when I was having this conversation, he was telling me about how that came from observation and pure the user research insight. So I'm
Interesting.
just,
I mean,
yeah, from
which is
a
fair.
perspective, are there any principles in terms of from the language how the reality has been shaped?
Um, Let me think about this, right? So what the Krishify person is saying that, hey, for him, the lowest common denominator was somebody who knew Hindi and also knew the dialect, for example, let's say, right? And he figured out that his product will actually never be able to scale to the dialect because it's just too diverse. So the best way for me to is use my lowest common denominator and then expand from that sort of node, right? And not in a product led way, maybe a mix of product and services. And that actually is a great approach, right? Because that's one way to sort of go deep and horizontal at the same time, right? uh, by and large, I would say this if you come think about it completely in a product led way, you're likely to fail because there's too many axes that you will have to deal with, right? The right approach is probably like something like what Krishify did, which is a mix of product and services, right? And you can even sort of abstract this to some other use cases. For example, the QR code and payment through UPI use case to your local sabji wala, for example, right? It didn't happen by magic. The first push was that 50,000 strong sort of sales force who went on the ground, put those QR code stickers and stood by while the first 10 payments went through and handheld that guy saying, hey, this is how things are working. ये देखो 100 रुपए आ गए, 20 रुपए आ गए, 100 रुपए आ गए, 20 रुपए आ गए. ये वाला transaction fail हुआ. Don't worry, I'm still here. It will come back to your account, right? And then that sort of built some base level of trust. And once this guy, like your local kirana owner or sabji wala, has got the hang of it, then he's actually a little bit more happier because now he gets status by pushing that technology to his friends, right? Like he can say, boss, I know this, देखो इतने आसानी से होता है, तुम लोग use नहीं करते हो, तुम गधे हो, right? For example, but here I will help you set it up, right? But it took that hard sort of 50,000 sales force plus demonetization plus all of this to really accelerate it, right? Otherwise, if we didn't have demonetization, it would probably still be in the early upward trends of that journey. But because we had that hard stop, we had to sort of go through this in a very quick way, right? So product plus services is something that I've seen to work, right? Maybe abstract this a little bit also to something like Misho, right? Although Misho today is a very horizontal e-commerce player, the early model was reseller, right? Where they said, I have a product which is so low quality. I mean, not low quality, low in price value matching, right? Like it's much lower at price, but much lower in quality as well. That I will not be able to sell it in a pure sort of website form, right? So typically, what these kind of products are sold in your village shops, right, where there's hard sales motion, etc. But these guys wanted to build a very horizontal, large business. So what are the kind of sellers I can tap into? Which is these women who are sitting at home wanting to earn commission on that sales, right? I said, okay, my product will be the e-commerce backend of all of this, but actually the services I'm adding on top is the help of these resellers, right? And that was a great go-to-market for them, helped them build early traction in this horizontal e-commerce. Then they obviously figured out there was a ceiling and then pivoted to horizontal, etc. Fact remains that if they didn't think of it in that model, they would have never been able to build what Meesho is today.
So you're saying they looked at a sort of resellers and targeted women who would sort of sell them to the near networks. From that you see?
To their close by networks, right? It was like, okay, I have the Meesho app and somebody in my network is looking for sofa covers, right? So I open the app and show it to her. कि हाँ अच्छा ये अच्छा लग रहा है etc etc. And then she says खरीद लो क्योंकि मैंने भी खरीदा अच्छा quality है, and that's all it takes, right? And then that commission comes to her and then becomes a self-fulfilling loop etc etc, right? This wouldn't have happened if it was just this other person looking at some app and saying, yeah, okay, I definitely not going to buy from this because it looks low quality, plus I don't know where I'm buying from.
Yeah. No, I think yeah, this is very interesting, right? Because in our in a typical in India One network, there is a certain sense of a social network that gets built. Right? Whereas in an India 2, I'm just curious. I don't know from the way the social networks are built, there may be a lot of different nuance in this aspect, right? Because I remember we had this conversation with one of the startups I was closely mentoring. So they had this feature where there's this product where the commission agents in agriculture, they post their prices. And they post their prices in a way to get the buyers and attention and all. Now, one of the product guys who were in that got really enthusiastic and created a code in a way where it would send off as some kind of an automated notification to that person's all WhatsApp contacts.
Okay.
And something, and because of that, it created a huge furore for that product. I mean, the people, the customers are extremely pissed with that product.
Okay.
Because of one notification that went out of from an automated one.
Right.
And it disrupted and the guys were almost started to uninstall, and a lot of product churns happened and all. So, it really led me to think
this
about.
Is a little bit, this is a little bit strange to me, right? Because it doesn't fit with all the observations I've made, right?
Yeah, no, this is because this is an agri context, no? Because you have your competitors also in your peers.
Okay, got it.
You
That
have your
makes sense.
competitors in your peers, and then you're also monitoring them. So there is a lot of nuance around who gets to be my insider vis-a-vis who I'm monitoring for my work there. This is a very work context there. So I think that's where the difference.
Correct. Yeah, because in the social context, right? Like, I would be like completely okay if I was building a non-work app to utilize this person's contacts in any way possible, right? Because if I was building for the India One audience, I'd be very, very cagey, right? Even sending one wrong message to somebody and be like, "Oh, privacy, ye wo, dunya bhar ka, etc., right? But see, I have to think backwards on why this is the case, right? For a new to internet audience, let's say my mom, for example, right, is 60 years old and she didn't grow up with the smartphone age or even in the computer age, right? So all of this stuff is almost like magic to her, right? Which is some long lost friend she suddenly finds on some WhatsApp group is like, boss, this would have never been possible earlier, right? Whereas we don't even care that there's a long lost friend. We're like, boss, I don't know, I forgot him already, right? But for my mom, now that is the kind of sort of forget WhatsApp, Facebook, right? That is the kind of happiness that this kind of magic brings to their life, right? So they're not okay. They're completely okay with all of these random notifications. They'll take the time saying, "Acha, haan, ye acha, ye bura, ye acha, ye bura hai." But I want to keep getting this information, right? Because there's no other way I would have been connected to friends from 30 years ago, right? So there's a very different way that people think about usage in this audience as well.
Yeah. And that's where I was very intrigued in terms of, typically in networks theory, there is a certain level of, like, we have the weak links and then the strong links networks there, right? And typically we have this idea, which is, again, I don't know if it's an India One idea, right? that I would largely have a strong link, and then I would have a weak link. Weak link, mane, I would people from whom I consume content and all of that, right? But I think in an India 2 audience, that structure is very, very complex.
Yeah, I would say it's mostly all strong links and a lot of strong links, right? Like there's very like if you've been born and brought up and gone to school and college and married somebody from within a 50-kilometer radius, right? Then you probably know every second person there, right? And this is like super strange for me because again, I'll take the example of people in my family, right? They know everybody, right? And like every day they're attending a wedding and I ask them, "Kiska hai? Oh, XYZ ka ye, ABC ka ye," and I'm like, "Boss, like ye XYZ also I don't know, and this is ABC and 1, 2, 3 on top of that." And
Yeah,
my parents will be like, "No, we have to go because
yeah.
they're very close." And I'm like, "Boy, but this is 3 degrees, right?" So they know everybody because in a sense it is important to know everybody, right? Like the kind of support you get from a community, like we can all say ki we can live without it, etc., etc., but that's not the reality, right? Like if push comes to shove, then only the people around you will be helping you, right? And they've known this for a long time, and which is why they work extra hard to maintain those social connections, right? Because at some point in their life something
Good
has
point.
come
Yeah,
back to
yeah,
them, right?
yeah,
Saying, if I had not known this person, this would have not happened. So it is important for me to keep those relationships.
yeah. Yeah, and I think they've internalized it, and I think it's again a centripetal energy is coming back to a centrifugal and coming
Yeah.
back to its center. So we are
Yeah,
now, I
correct.
think, also rediscovering community aspects in a obviously in, of
Correct.
course, in a new form, but of
Correct.
course I mean, like in Hyderabad we have this concept of like back in the good old days where you have these gardens and screenings would happen, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Or in rural we still in Swades we saw that famous scene of where they put a projector and see, right? Now in
Hmm.
Hyderabad this trend has now caught on where there's a lawn, and then you're told what movies are going to get screened,
Hmm.
and then you are given an opportunity to watch in a lawn in the comfort of your bean bag with again a lot of strangers,
Hmm.
but in a slightly more social environment, because there's no like a seat kind of a privacy kind of thing.
Correct. Correct. I would even go as far to say, right? Like, sure, I mean, like people like us are now saying, hey, all of this digital business is too much. Like we now have to go and meet people, right? Because that's where life is. And now there's, as you said, a bunch of this community mechanics emerging, right? But I would go to say that we will still treat this as an entertainment part of life, right?
Hmm.
Whereas people like my parents, or I would even say like youngsters like me, although I'm not that very young, but who have this mindset of not being from a tier 1 city and speaking their local language, etc. For them, it is actually life. There is no entertainment aspect to it, right? Like if somebody takes away the occasional screening that I go to outside, I'd be like, "Ha,
Correct,
theek hai,
correct,
fine, no big deal," right? But if
correct.
you sever the networks for
Yeah,
somebody in India too, it's
yeah,
like all over, right?
yeah, yeah.
So I still make that very strong differentiation between networks, right? And obviously, I wrote in my last post as well that this is a big reason, or not reason, this is how trust evolves, right? Everybody knows everybody, and it is that social fabric is so ingrained in you from day 1, day 5 of your life. Then trust is a natural outcome, right? It's not that you have to build it, right? It'll just happen, right? You know this guy, like, what, like, fine, he's asking for some money. What is the worst that can happen, right? He'll not give it back. It's okay, right? Like, I'll ask somebody else for money. I'm sure he'll give it to me, right? So that's how things work in this audience. Again, this is today, maybe also in 5, 10 years, but I don't know. Like in 10 years, as affluence increases, will things get more sparser, denser? Still have to form a view on that.
Yeah, no, I think see, this is also a aspect about the land also, right?
Hmm.
Now, to a large extent, we see, of course, certain kinds of land migration patterns we see in this country,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Why do so many people come to Kerala for work? Because the labor charges are high.
Communist government. Yeah.
People get paid more. So a lot of
Correct.
people migrate to Kerala to do a lot of labor work because they get
Right.
paid.
Correct.
And there is clear data. And likewise, you will see the cook who comes in my home and who makes lovely South Indian cuisine is a Odisha cook.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
And now, to a certain extent, if you see certain migratory patterns in terms of how people move in and migrate, I think a lot of that social structures are also going to drastically change. Right.
Correct.
Because
Correct.
you and I, I mean, this is what goes back to that time theory, right? Time theory of consumer habits. If I were to
Right.
write it, like
Right.
it was a previous generation did that because they
Hmm.
were also rooted in that location.
Correct.
We
Correct.
migrated the moment we migrated from different places, right? I studied in Gujarat, and then I grew up in Chennai. I studied in Gujarat and then did my MBA in Pune. So automatically that migratory pattern has changed my community relation.
Correct. Correct.
So
Correct. Yeah.
likewise, you will expect to see the similar one happen if their work or context is also very much migratory in that way. Yeah.
Fair. And perspective, you'll know that cities will become bigger, right? That's where most of the economic engines are in India. We want people to move from agriculture to industry. Industries are not very spread out, so you'll see that migration be happening more and more, and then hence what kind of mechanics emerge after that will be interesting to watch.
Yeah, but that's where things are also, it's very interesting, right? Like right now, if you see the latest data, NFS data and all, people are getting more absorbed by construction rather than industry.
Interesting. Okay. And construction in urban areas or still like
across the country. You see the construction data from the PLFS data, people are getting more absorbed in construction industry rather than the industry because anyway, see the industrial, we've already gone into an AI kind of an era where right now not many people are required also. Right. So the industrial age that's where, I mean, that's one reason where Modi government is also emphasizing a lot on SMB firms and entrepreneurship because they know that in creating smaller level but clustered approach of SMB kind of firms, there's a better way of employment rather than
fair.
The traditional industrial kind of age. So that way we are seeing some shift also happening there. Yeah, but it's very, very interesting to see how that will affect the community and the social structures that way.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Great, yeah. I think this is a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Same here. Always good to speak with you and learn some more. I think the interesting thing for me to when speaking to you is always sort of putting the like I think like a median India consumer, but actually median India consumer from a economics perspective is still an agriculturist, right? So it's important to sort of keep in touch with that. So yeah, had fun chatting about this.
No, and that's where for me, I'm also very intrigued by at some stage, do we get to sense of India 3 as a consumer base? And and also get a sense of like this is my pet peeve, right? Because I feel India 3 as an audience, in a certain level has now been looked down as not monetizable or whatever reasons for that may be. But there is also a sense of how do we then look at that as a segment also? Like today, you take a large number of tenant farmers, right? Tenant farmers are those who are migrating and getting labor. Now they would largely come under probably an India 3 kind of a consumer profile.
Right.
So
Correct.
I'm very keen to see, and my intent in having these dialogues is also for people who are in the agri-tech founders and investors who are also looking at this, how they are also now, this might stir a lot of conversations on how do we think about the India 3 as a segment, and is there a very distinctive set of principles that might emerge in the near future?
Fair. Makes sense. Interesting.
Yeah. So we'll see how this goes. Thanks you very, very much. And
Thanks for having me, Venki.
Yeah.
Thank you.